The cold winds of the frozen planet howled through the jagged mountains, a chilling reminder of the harsh world that the alien battle queen called home. She stood on a high cliff, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her armor gleaming in the wiggle. Dim sunlight, her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the blood-red sun was just beginning to set. Her name was Kalira, the battle queen, a fierce warrior who had led her people to victory countless times. She had faced thousands of challengers, each one hoping to claim her throne, but none had succeeded. None had been able to match her strength and skill in combat. The legend of Kalira's undefeated reign spread across the galaxy, becoming a symbol of invincibility and power. Today, though, something was different. Today, there was a new challenger. A human warrior, small in stature compared to her towering form, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination. He had traveled across the galaxy, braving dangerous territories and fierce enemies, just to face her in battle. The news of his arrival had sent ripples through the galaxy. He was the one person who dared to challenge Kalira. And he was not going to back down. The two stood on opposite sides of the battlefield, the air thick with tension. Kalira's sword glinted in the fading light, her grip firm and unyielding. She could feel the human's gaze on her, but he showed no sign of fear. Instead, there was something in his eyes, something that made her hesitate for just a moment. It was a fire, a will that matched her own. Without warning, the battle began. Kalira swung her sword, her movements a blur of speed and precision. The human barely dodged, his own sword slashing through the air with surprising skill. He was fast, too fast for someone of his size, and his strength, though not on her level, was more than she had expected. Kalira's strikes were powerful, each one capable of splitting stone. But the human was relentless. He moved like a shadow, always just out of reach, always just a step ahead. With each passing second, Kalira felt something stir within her, a respect for the human. Something she had never felt for any of her challengers before. The fight continued, neither giving an inch, neither willing to back down. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered as their swords clashed, each strike echoing across the frozen landscape. But even as the battle raged on, Kalira could sense that something was shifting. The human was not just fighting to win. He was fighting for something greater. He was fighting for her. She felt it in the way he moved, the way he held his ground. It wasn't just a battle for power, it was a battle for honor, for respect. Kalira had never encountered a challenger like him, and that realization made her question everything she knew about strength. Could someone like him truly defeat her? Could this human, this small, fragile being, actually make her beg for mercy? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in shadow, Kalira knew the battle was far from over. The human's will was unbreakable, and Kalira's heart began to race with something other than fury. It was curiosity, something she had long buried beneath her hardened exterior. What was this human truly capable of? What would it take for him to win, and what would she have to lose? Asterisk, the human warrior's strikes were calculated and precise. With every swing of his sword, he pushed Kalira back, forcing her to adapt to his unexpected agility. She had never fought anyone like him before, and for the first time in years, she felt the tension of uncertainty building within her. Kalira's mind raced as she tried to assess her opponent. His movements were unpredictable, his focus unwavering. He wasn't relying on brute strength like the other challengers. Instead, he was using his wit, his speed, and his knowledge of her tactics. This human was a different kind of warrior, one who fought not for the glory of battle, but for something deeper. For a moment, Kalira paused, her sword raised in defense. The clash of metal echoed in the still air as the human took a step back, his chest heaving with exertion. Kalira studied him carefully, noting the fierce determination in his eyes. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her. He wasn't afraid, not in the slightest. "You fight well," Kalira said, her voice cold but laced with a hint of respect. She had never spoken to a challenger before, but this human was different. He didn't answer her. Instead, focusing on his next move, the battle continued with increasing intensity. Kalira's confidence had started to waver as the human expertly dodged her every move. Using his smaller frame to his advantage, he was relentless, never stopping. Always moving, always on the attack. Her arms were beginning to tire. But the human showed no sign of slowing down. The battlefield seemed to close in on them as the ground beneath their feet grew slick with blood. Kalira's breath came harder now, her heart pounding in her chest. She was not used to feeling the burn of fatigue during a fight, but this human was forcing her to push her limits. For the first time, she began to feel the weight of her own power. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. She was not invincible. She could be defeated. Kalira took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. She couldn't allow herself to show weakness, especially in front of an opponent like this. But as the human closed the gap, she felt something she had never felt before: hesitation. The human's next strike was swift and powerful. Aimed directly at her chest, Kalira barely managed to deflect it, her sword meeting his with a resounding clash. The impact reverberated through her arm, sending a jolt of pain through her body. She grimaced, but quickly regained her stance, determined not to let the human see her falter. She could see it now. The human wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting for something much more important. He was fighting for the chance to prove something that Kalira had forgotten in her years of endless victories. He was fighting for honor, for the pride of his people, for the very idea of defying the impossible. Kalira's mind shifted as she saw the fire in his eyes. She recognized that fire because it was the same fire that had once burned within her. The hunger for victory, the drive to be the strongest, the desire to prove that nothing could stand in your way. "Is this what you want?" Kalira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had spoken before, but this time her words felt different. The human didn't respond, but his sword did all the talking. He moved in again, faster than before, closing the distance between them. With a swift, unexpected move, the human sword scraped along Kalira's armor, leaving a long, deep gash. Kalira's breath hitched in her throat as the pain shot through her side. The blood began to flow, staining her armor. She staggered back, momentarily disoriented. This was not how she had imagined the battle going. The human, who had been underestimated so many times, was proving to be more than a match for her. Kalira's pride surged, but so did something else. Doubt. Could this human truly be the one to end her reign? Was she actually going to lose? For the first time in her life, Kalira found herself questioning everything she had believed. She had never lost, never even come close. But this human, with his resilience and skill, was making her rethink what it truly meant to be the greatest warrior in the galaxy. She watched as he took another step forward, his sword raised high. He was ready to finish what he had started, and Kalira realized she was no longer sure if she could stop him. The human warrior advanced steadily, his eyes locked on Kalira. She could feel the intensity of his focus, and for the first time in years, she found herself feeling something she had never expected: fear. Kalira quickly raised her sword in defense as the human lunged at her. His strike was fast, faster than she had anticipated. She barely managed to block it, the force of his attack reverberating through her arm. The impact sent a jolt of pain up her shoulder, but she steadied herself, refusing to show any sign of weakness. "You are stronger than I thought," Kalira muttered, more to herself than to the human. She had never faced an opponent who could push her this far. Every other challenger had fallen before her. But this one was different. He was relentless, and with each strike, he seemed to grow more confident. The battle raged on, the clash of their swords echoing across the barren field. Kalira's movements became more calculated, her strikes sharper. Yet, the human was always one step ahead, dodging, weaving, countering. His agility was unmatched, and his swordplay was precise. Kalira found herself pushed to her limits. She had always been known for her strength and speed, but this human, this small, fragile being, was proving to be an equal match. Her mind raced as she tried to find a weakness, something she could exploit. But the human was too skilled. He moved like water, flowing around her defenses, slipping past her guard. Kalira was starting to tire. Her breath came faster, her muscles aching from the constant exertion. She had never fought this hard in her life, and the realization struck her like a hammer. She was no longer in control. The human was taking charge of the fight. But Kalira was not one to give up. She dug deep within herself, summoning every ounce of her strength. She swung her sword with renewed force, aiming for the human's exposed side. He was quick, but this time, he couldn't avoid the blow. Kalira's sword grazed his arm. Drawing a line of blood, the human gritted his teeth but didn't flinch. He was as determined as ever, and Kalira could see the fire in his eyes burning brighter. It was the fire of someone who refused to back down, someone who would fight to the very end. "You are strong," Kalira said, her voice low but filled with genuine admiration. She had fought countless opponents, but this human was different. He wasn't fighting for glory or power. He was fighting for something far greater. He was fighting for the honor of his people, for the chance to prove that even the smallest could defeat the greatest. The human didn't respond. He didn't need to. His sword spoke for him, the sound of it slicing through the air as it aimed at Kalira's throat. She barely managed to dodge, the blade grazing her cheek. The pain was sharp, but it only fueled her determination. With a growl of frustration, Kalira launched herself at the human, her sword coming down with a vicious strike. The human raised his sword to block, but the force of her blow sent him stumbling back. He was beginning to show signs of fatigue, his movements slower, more labored. Kalira knew that she couldn't keep this up forever. She was stronger, faster, and more experienced, but the human was relentless. His will was unbreakable, and that made him a dangerous opponent. The two circled each other, eyes locked in a fierce battle of wills. Kalira's mind raced as she tried to find a way to end this, but the human had already shown her that brute strength alone would not win the fight. It would take more than that. She needed to outsmart him, to use her intellect as well as her strength. The human was good, but Kalira was better. She had been trained for years in every form of combat, every technique, every strategy. But now she was fighting someone who was not only her equal in skill, but her equal in determination. The human lunged again, and this time, Kalira saw the opening she had been waiting for. She sidestepped at the last moment, bringing her sword down in a swift arc. The human's sword clashed with hers, but his momentum carried him too far forward. Kalira seized the opportunity, knocking him off balance and sending him sprawling to the ground. For a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze. Kalira stood over the human, her sword raised. She could end this now, strike the final blow and claim victory. But as she looked down at him, something held her back. The human wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to show her that strength came in many forms. And in that moment, Kalira realized something. This battle was not just about strength. It was about respect. Kalira stood over the human, her sword raised and ready to strike. The battlefield around them was eerily quiet, the sounds of their clash now replaced by the cold winds that swept across the desolate landscape. Her chest heaved with exertion, her body bruised and battered from the intense fight. The human lay on the ground, his breath heavy, his body covered in blood, but his eyes remained defiant. Kalira could see the determination in his gaze, the same fire that had burned within her all those years ago. He had never once shown fear, never once hesitated in his pursuit to challenge her. For the first time in her life, Kalira found herself questioning her own purpose. She had been the ruler, the invincible warrior, but now, facing this human, she felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. He had forced her to dig deeper than she ever had before, to fight in a way that was unfamiliar to her. Why? Kalira asked, her voice softer than she had intended. She had fought countless challengers, but none had ever made her stop and think. None had ever made her question her place in the galaxy. The human, still lying on the ground, didn't answer immediately. He only lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He was unlike any opponent she had ever faced. His answer, when it came, was simple but profound. "Because I believe in something greater than myself," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I fight not for glory, but for honor, and I fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." Kalira's grip tightened on her sword, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected many things from this fight. She had expected a worthy challenge, a victory, maybe even a moment of satisfaction. But this was different. The human's words resonated deep within her. She had once fought for glory, for the thrill of the battle, to prove her superiority. But now, faced with someone who fought for a cause beyond his own pride, Kalira felt something stir inside her. It was not a weakness, but a realization. The human wasn't just a challenger. He was a symbol of something Kalira had long forgotten. The power of fighting for something greater than oneself. The power of fighting for others, not for one's own ego or pride. For the first time, Kalira saw the human not as a foe to be defeated, but as an equal. She could end this now, strike the final blow, and walk away victorious. But something within her held her back. She had always seen strength as a measure of one's ability to conquer, to dominate. But this human had shown her that true strength came from something else. It came from sacrifice, from standing up for others, even when the odds were stacked against you. Kalira lowered her sword slightly, her gaze never leaving the human. She had never backed down from a fight, never showed mercy to an opponent. But now, in this moment, she felt a shift. She was no longer sure of what victory meant. The human, sensing the change, pushed himself up slightly, his hand still gripping his sword. He wasn't finished, not yet. Despite the pain, despite the blood that stained his clothes, he was still determined. Kalira could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to give up. He would fight until the very end. Not for himself, but for the ideals he believed in. And in that moment, Kalira realized that this human had already won. "Your will is stronger than mine," Kalira admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It was a truth she had never wanted to face. She had always believed that strength was about domination, about crushing your enemies beneath your feet. But this human had shown her a different path, a path of honor, of fighting for something greater. Kalira knelt down beside the human, her sword still in hand, but no longer raised in threat. She had never expected this. She had never expected to be humbled by a mere human. "You've proven your worth," Kalira said, her voice firm but filled with respect. "I will not kill you." The human blinked in surprise, his body trembling from the strain of the fight. You won't?" he asked, his voice weak but filled with disbelief. "No," Kalira replied simply. "You've earned my respect, and that is something no one else has ever done." The human sat up slowly, his expression filled with exhaustion and relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his gratitude clear in his eyes. Kalira looked at him for a long moment, the realization settling in. This human had not only defeated her in battle, but he had also defeated her in a way no one ever had before. He had shown her the true meaning of strength. As Kalira stood up and turned away, she felt the weight of the battle lift from her shoulders. She had lost, but in a way, she had also gained something far more valuable. The knowledge that true strength came not from domination, but from the courage to fight for others. The tension in the air was thick as Kalira and the human stood in the quiet aftermath of their battle. Kalira's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts swirling with a mixture of confusion and admiration. She had never expected to find herself in this position. She had never thought she would see a human, much less one so determined, win her respect. The human, though battered and bruised, stood tall. He had not only survived the battle, but he had done so with honor, something Kalira had never seen in her previous challengers. Her mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. This human had not only defeated her in combat, but he had done something no one else had ever done. He had made her question everything she believed about strength, power, and honor. Kalira found herself at a crossroads. She had always defined herself by her victories, by her strength, by the fear she instilled in others. She was the battle queen, undefeated and invincible. But now she felt something shift deep within her. The fight, the challenge, had not been about winning or losing. It had been about something much deeper. It had been about respect, about understanding the strength it took to fight for something greater than yourself. The human stood before her, waiting for her to make her next move. Kalira didn't know what to say or do. For the first time in her life, she was unsure. "You've earned my respect," Kalira said, her voice steady but with a softness that surprised her. "You've proven that true strength lies not in domination, but in fighting for something greater than yourself." The human's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, his exhaustion evident in his posture. "I never thought I'd find myself saying this," Kalira continued, her gaze never leaving him. "But you've shown me something I've never seen before. You've shown me the true meaning of strength." The human smiled, a faint, weary smile. "I didn't fight to prove my strength," he said, his voice quiet. "I fought because I believed in something worth fighting for." Kalira nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. She had spent so many years focused on herself, on her own power, that she had forgotten what it meant to fight for something bigger than her own glory. She had forgotten that true strength came from the courage to protect others, to stand up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Maybe that's something I need to learn," Kalira said, her voice softening. She had always thought she knew what it meant to be strong, but now she saw that there was so much more to it than she had ever realized. True strength was about sacrifice, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The human nodded, his expression one of understanding. "We all have something to learn, even the greatest warriors." Kalira stepped back, taking a moment to compose herself. The fight was over, but the journey she had just begun was only starting. She had always believed that victory was the ultimate goal, that strength was the key to ruling the galaxy. But now she understood that true power came from humility, from the willingness to listen and learn from others. "Thank you," Kalira said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You've shown me something I needed to see." The human smiled once again, this time with a genuine warmth. "You're welcome, Battle Queen." Kalira turned away, her mind still processing the profound change she had just experienced. She had come to this battle expecting to defeat a mere human, to prove her dominance once again. But in the end, it was the human who had defeated her, not through strength alone, but through the purity of his will and his unwavering dedication to something greater. As she walked away, Kalira couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in years, she felt that she had truly learned something. She wasn't just the battle queen anymore. She was someone who had finally realized what it meant to be truly strong. The human watched her leave, a faint smile still on his lips. He had come here to challenge the greatest warrior in the galaxy, but in the end, it wasn't just Kalira who had changed. He had also learned something important. Strength wasn't about winning battles or defeating foes. It was about finding the courage to fight for the right reasons. **. The galaxy had always been a place of constant conflict, with battles fought over territory, power, and pride. But for Kalira, the Battle Queen, there was something different in the air now. Something had changed within her. Something that had been awakened by the human's unwavering resolve. She had never imagined that a single battle could alter the course of her life so profoundly. As she sat in her war room, the weight of the human's words echoed in her mind. True strength lies not in domination, but in fighting for something greater than yourself. She had always believed in the need to be the strongest, to crush every opponent beneath her. But now she saw that there was more to leadership, more to power than simply defeating those who stood in her way. The message was clear. She had been living in the shadow of her own pride, hiding behind the armor of invincibility. But it was time for her to face a new reality, one where her strength was no longer defined by the fear she instilled in others. Her strength, she now realized, was rooted in her ability to protect, to inspire, and to fight for those who could not defend themselves. Kalira stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table as she gazed at the holographic map of the galaxy. There were still many battles to be fought, many enemies to face, but now she had a new purpose. She would no longer fight for herself, but for something far greater than her own desires. She would fight for the future of her people, for the freedom of those who could not fight for themselves. Her decision was firm. It was time to change the way she ruled, to change the way she fought. The human had shown her that true leadership was about service, not about dominance. She would use her strength to defend the weak, to ensure that the injustices of the galaxy were righted. She summoned her commanders, each one a warrior in their own right. As they entered the room, their eyes fell on her, waiting for her orders. They had always looked up to her as the Battle Queen, the one who had never been defeated. But now, Kalira knew she had to show them a different path, one that would lead to a future where strength was used for the good of all, not for personal gain. "We are no longer just conquerors," Kalira said, her voice commanding but filled with newfound wisdom. "We are protectors, defenders of those who cannot defend themselves." Her words were met with silence, but Kalira could see the hesitation in their eyes. They had always followed her because of her strength, her ability to defeat anyone who stood before her. Now, they were being asked to follow her for a different reason. "Do you doubt me?" Kalira asked, her voice hardening. "Do you think that I am no longer capable of leading?" One of the commanders, a seasoned warrior named Torin, stepped forward. "We do not doubt you, my queen," he said, his voice respectful. "But this is a new path, one that will require great sacrifice. We will follow you, but it will not be easy." Kalira nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. It would not be easy. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with enemies who would not hesitate to exploit any sign of weakness. But Kalira was no longer the same warrior who had crushed her foes with ruthless efficiency. She had learned that true strength came from the courage to fight for what was right, even when the odds were against you. "We will not fight for power," Kalira continued, her voice steady and firm. "We will fight for justice. We will fight for the freedom of those who cannot fight for themselves. We will be the shield that stands between the weak and the strong, the protector of those who are oppressed." The commanders exchanged glances, and one by one, they knelt before her. "We will follow you, my queen," Torin said, his voice filled with resolve. "We will fight for the cause you have set before us." Kalira smiled, a rare and genuine smile. For the first time in her life, she felt that she had found her true purpose. She was no longer just the Battle Queen. She was a leader who had learned the value of protecting others, of fighting not for personal glory, but for the greater good. Her journey was just beginning. But Kalira knew that she had found a path that would lead her to something far more meaningful than any victory she had ever won. She would fight for the future, for the peace that could be built, one battle at a time. As Kalira looked out over the galaxy, she no longer saw it as a battleground. She saw it as a place filled with people who needed protection, who needed strength to defend them. And she would be the one to provide that strength, not for her own pride, but for the people who needed her. The Battle Queen had changed, but her strength remained. She had learned that true strength was not measured by how many enemies you defeated, but by how many lives you saved. Kalira stood at the helm of her flagship, watching as the fleet gathered around her. The stars outside the viewport shone brightly, but her mind was focused on the mission ahead. It had been weeks since her decision to lead with honor and compassion. And now the first test of her new path had come. The galaxy was still filled with those who sought to conquer, to oppress, and to destroy. Kalira had learned that the fight for justice was not a simple one. It was a constant struggle, a battle that would take everything she had. But now, she wasn't fighting alone. Her people had followed her, their hearts and minds changed by the purpose she had set before them. "We are ready, my queen," Torrin said as he stepped beside her. His voice was calm, but there was a steel in it that had not been there before. The commanders who had once followed her for her strength now followed her for something far more powerful, the belief in her cause. Kalira nodded, her gaze never leaving the stars. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her, but she knew this was the path she had chosen, the one she would walk no matter the cost. "We fight not for power," Kalira said, her voice strong and steady, "but for the freedom of those who have none. We fight for the oppressed, for the weak, for the innocent who have no one to protect them." Her words echoed through the ship, carried by the silent resolve of her crew. They had all seen what she had become, what she stood for, a leader who fought for something more than herself. "Are we ready to begin?" Kalira asked, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the galaxy ahead. "We are," Torrin replied. "The enemy is assembling forces near the southern quadrant. We believe they are preparing for an invasion of a peaceful world. It is our job to stop them." Kalira's eyes hardened. She had spent her life fighting wars, but now it was different. This was not about defeating an enemy to expand her power. This was about protecting lives, about ensuring that the innocent would not suffer. "Prepare the fleet," Kalira commanded. "We move out at once. The enemy will not have the chance to harm those who cannot defend themselves." As the fleet began to mobilize, Kalira felt a strange calmness wash over her. She had always been a warrior, always been the one to charge into battle without hesitation. But now, there was a new clarity in her actions. She was not just leading for herself. She was leading for others. The battle began as they approached the southern quadrant. The enemy fleet had gathered, ready to strike, but they had not expected Kalira and her forces to arrive. The confrontation was swift, but it was not a fight for victory. It was a fight to save lives, to stop the destruction before it could begin. Kalira's flagship was at the front of the battle, her ship cutting through the enemy forces with precision. Her commanders followed her lead, their ships working together to form a united front. The clash of energy shields and the sound of laser fire filled the void of space, but there was no joy in it. This battle was not for conquest but for protection. As the enemy retreated, Kalira stood in silence, watching the aftermath unfold. The peaceful world they had protected was safe, its people unaware of the battle that had raged above them. Her fleet moved into a defensive position, ensuring that no further threats would approach. The victory was not one of glory or pride. It was a quiet triumph, a victory for those who would never know the cost. Kalira felt a strange peace within her. For the first time in her life, she had won a battle not for herself, but for the future of others. Torrin approached her once the battle was over, a small but respectful smile on his face. "You did it, my queen. You've led us to victory in the name of justice." Kalira nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the distant stars. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We will fight for as long as we must for those who cannot protect themselves. We will be the shield that guards the weak, the defenders of peace in a galaxy filled with chaos." She turned to face her commanders, each one standing tall, their faces filled with pride. They had followed her into this battle, and now they would follow her into many more. "This is what we stand for," Kalira said, her voice ringing with authority. "We are not just warriors. We are protectors, and we will fight for the future of this galaxy." One battle at a time, the commanders knelt before her, pledging their loyalty not just to a queen, but to the cause she had set before them. Kalira's heart swelled with pride, but it was not the pride of a conqueror. It was the pride of someone who had found a new purpose, someone who had discovered the true meaning of strength. As she looked out into the vastness of space, Kalira knew that her journey was far from over. There were still many battles to fight, many injustices to right, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready. She was not just the battle queen, she was a leader, and this was her fight for something greater. Asterisk. Kalira stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, silent witnesses to the changes that had taken place in her life. She had come a long way from the ruthless battle queen who had once ruled through fear. Now, she was a leader, one who fought for a cause greater than herself. Her fleet had grown, and so had her vision. What began as a journey to protect the innocent had turned into something more. It had turned into a movement, a force for peace that spread throughout the galaxy. And it was all because of that one human warrior who had made her question everything she had ever known about strength, leadership, and honor. The communications officer stepped forward, interrupting Kalira's thoughts. "My queen," she said, "we've received a message from the Council of Systems. They wish to speak with you." Kalira nodded and turned to face the officer. "Put them through," she said, her voice steady. She had long since grown accustomed to these types of communications. The Council had always been wary of her, afraid of her power and influence. But now she was no longer just a warrior to them, she was a force for change. The holographic image of the council leader flickered to life in front of her. His face was stern, but his eyes showed a glimmer of respect. "Kalira, Battle Queen," he began, "we have been watching your actions. You have done what few thought was possible. You have turned your fleet into something more than just an instrument of war. You have made it a symbol of hope for those who have suffered." Kalira listened silently, her gaze unwavering. She had never sought the approval of others, but hearing these words from the council leader filled her with a quiet pride. She had always known that her purpose had changed, but hearing it from others confirmed that her path was the right one. "You have united the galaxy in a way we never thought possible," the council leader continued. "Your actions have inspired many, and your people stand behind you. What we ask now is simple. We ask you to join the council, to lead alongside us as we work to rebuild the galaxy, to ensure that peace and justice prevail." Kalira's heart raced, but her mind remained calm. She had always been a warrior, a queen who stood alone. But this was different. She had built something far more powerful than a fleet. She had built a movement. "I appreciate your offer," Kalira said, her voice steady and firm, "but I will not lead for the sake of power. I will lead because it is the right thing to do. If joining the council means protecting the galaxy and ensuring that peace endures, then I will do so." The council leader smiled, the first true smile Kalira had seen from him. "We are glad to have you with us, Kalira. Together we will create a future that is brighter than any of us could have imagined." As the transmission ended, Kalira stood in silence for a moment, taking in the weight of what had just happened. She had always known that her journey would be difficult, but she had never imagined that it would lead her to a place like this. She had spent so many years fighting for power, for victory, but now she understood that true leadership came from something greater. It came from the ability to inspire, to protect, and to lead by example. The crew of her flagship had gathered on the bridge, waiting for her next command. Kalira turned to them, her heart filled with a sense of purpose. "We have been given a great opportunity," she said, her voice strong and full of conviction. "We are no longer just warriors. We are leaders, protectors of peace, and guardians of the future. Our journey is far from over, but together we will ensure that the galaxy becomes a place where justice, freedom, and hope can thrive." Her words were met with nods of agreement, and the crew stood a little taller. They had followed her through countless battles, but now they were following her for something far more powerful. They were following her for a cause, for a future that they could all believe in. Kalira turned once more to the stars, the weight of the galaxy resting on her shoulders, but she no longer felt the burden of it. She felt the strength of her people behind her, and that strength was what would carry them through the challenges ahead. The Battle Queen had been reborn, not as a conqueror, but as a protector. Her fight was no longer about defeating enemies or expanding her power. It was about ensuring that the galaxy, a galaxy that had been torn apart by war and suffering, would have a future filled with peace and hope, with her crew at her side. Kalira knew that they could achieve anything. They would fight not for themselves, but for the future of the galaxy, a future where the weak were protected and the innocent could live in peace. The road ahead would be difficult, but Kalira had learned that the greatest strength came not from conquering others, but from building something worth fighting for. And so, as the fleet set course for the next mission, Kalira stood tall, knowing that her true battle had only just begun.